Ironically enough, cats are an icon of humanity, receiving wholesome affection from Americans to receiving less wholesome affection from the Japanese. Cats are always portrayed as lovable creatures with peculiar habits. However, all these portrayals of cats usually have one thing in common. Just like petting a cat, these depictions are generally wholesome, sweet, and calming. That's why I'm excited to review Stray's world, because it's a game focused around a cat, where the world is grimy, squalid, and sordid. It's a curious, no pun intended, choice to put such a widely beloved creature in an environment befitting of BioShock. Because of this, every single frame has an interesting juxtaposition of a fish out of water or cat out of the living room. Of course, stray cats are by no means uncommon. Still, they're far more disheveled than our fluffy protagonist, who, as far as I can find, hasn't been given a name, so I shall refer to her as Cece from now on. Cece is an incredibly clean cat. Her coat is shiny, her fur is spotless, maybe to an unrealistic degree. Cece is an instantly lovable protagonist simply by her design, which many can relate to loving. So that's why I'm intrigued by this grungy setting she has to explore. I went into Stray assuming that it would be a puzzle platformer with no fail state, but not only can Cece die, she can also die quite gruesomely, as she's swarmed by bulbous insectoids that burrow into her fluffy flesh and drain the energy from her defeated, lifeless body. So that can be a bit disturbing, and that's why I love this setting with this protagonist. It's something you are so unlikely to see anywhere else because of emotions that we associate with certain things. Like, the protagonist of Toy Story 5 won't be Dilby the Dildo and Bertie the Butt Plug, because the audience already has feelings about those items, and those feelings do not associate with a Pixar movie. The world of Stray comes in two flavors: linear sections, which often feature enemies to avoid and/or stealth around, and more open environments that serve as hubs for inhabitants of the Undercity and places of world-building galore. I'll start with the linear sections. These parts of the game are often the most straightforward. They mainly consist of puzzle platforming, where the puzzle is figuring out what you can jump on and rushing past enemies before they can mob you. The puzzle platforming is beautifully animated. Instead of feeling fluid like Mario or Neon White does, there's a slight pause after each input, and a short little leg animation on Cece. That's a direct translation of how a cat will pull back when it's trying to bounce up onto a couch or the bed, where it may or may not be allowed. It's those little things where the developers took into consideration all the tiny minutiae and habits of a cat that really make Cece as a protagonist come to life. The unfortunate thing about the platforming is that there's so much of it in environments that don't massively change from area to area that you start to see a lot of reused assets for the platforming. It's a really cool discovery to figure out how to use the oil drum. It's less cool when you have to use it 7 more times in a 5-hour game. But back to the linear parts. These sections are the ones that could be considered filthy, as there are no inhabitants in these places and they're usually overrun by the head crab reminiscent Zerk. And when I say reminiscent, I mean they look exactly like them, but that's neither here nor there. The Zerk areas are plastered with their corpulent cocoons, and the walls are pasted with pudgy plaster. It's a lot like the fungal areas of The Last of Us, and frankly, I'm very tired of these meat moss environments. But there's a new sense of scale lent to them by the unintimidating size of our protagonist, that gives these areas a more Cobwebian sense than is present in other games where infectious ones serve as antagonists. There are only 2 hub areas, but they are easily the highlights of the game, and they're both reflective of the other. The architecture of the slums leaves them stacked on top of each other, with small crevices of alleys to squeeze through as the entire population feels packed together in an impenetrable prison of poverty. But despite the depressive nature of the slums, it feels far more like a home than anywhere else in the game. The residents are kind and helpful, the main quest and the characters are laid out here, and everyone feels like they matter just as much as anyone else does. The slums are the closest place you'll get to the warm, fuzzy vibes that most cats are present in that I talked about at the start of the video, so enjoy them while you're there. I will say that the compressed feel of the slums makes it far more rewarding to explore. The unregulated buildings and trash also make for far more entertaining platforming, and it has much more of a vertical feel than the other hub, which is vital in a game where one of the protagonist's primary forms of movement is climbing. On the opposite end of the spectrum is the second hub, Midtown. From a visual standpoint, wow! The bustling of the city streets, the bright clashing colours all vying for your attention, the glitz and glam of its shopping streets and town square, contrasted with its dirty alleyways, and the sense of scale I mentioned earlier, is never as effective as it is right here. The unique feeling of slinking around the city as a pest, rather than as a resident in another game, is genuinely a feeling unique to Stray. I'll even go so far as to say it captures the small child lost in a big new world vibe, better than some indie games built entirely around that concept. Unfortunately, that's where my praise of Midtown has to end, as the area is too flat for one thing, which is pretty bad for this game, and even worse, it's sprawling. It's easy to get lost, especially with no map, and the game only gives you instructions like the nightclub on where to go. This is also the spot where the game makes its biggest mistake by far, and it's a direct result of the level design. I like that there are no objective markers on where to go, and the game makes me poke around, look at everything, and interact with everything, just like a regular cat would. Up to this point, the thing I've often needed to find has either been in or around the room where the game gave me the quest, and even if it wasn't, the tight-knit level design wouldn't have made finding whatever item I needed a problem. Not so in Midtown, where to steal a coat, the game requires you to venture all the way to the other side of town to complete a side quest to get a cassette tape that the game didn't even specify we needed. Basically, there's a cassette player in the back of a store to play music on, and I assumed this was Midtown's version of the musician we met back in the slums, and that the cassette tapes were collectibles for this area. And the solution to the puzzle being hidden so far away is such a major slip-up. I was climbing up the building, talking to NPCs, trying to figure out what to do, and for this puzzle to take up 30 minutes of a 5-hour game, and just to have to look up a walkthrough to see the solution, was a betrayal of what the game was trying to teach me, and it was such a disappointment. The world of Stray is a wonderful juxtaposition of a wholesome, cuddly, feline protagonist in a world of strife, melancholy, and misery. Yet Stray is able to overcome the sourness of its environment and become a heartwarming game with tender moments. Even though it has a fair amount of stumbling, Stray is a game that always lands on its feet.